Welcome to the Deep Dive. Really glad you could join us again as we unpack another complex topic. Today we're exploring something quite profound, how the rhetoric of certain public figures can, well, really influence people, sometimes leading them to adopt worldviews that seem, frankly, contradictory and potentially dangerous. We're basing this discussion on insights from a YouTube video transcript. It's titled, "The Average Candace Owens Fan Hates Jews. Are They Dumb or Brainwashed?" from the channel Aquarius. And our goal here is to really try and understand that line, the critical difference between, free speech and maybe the irresponsible spread of information that some people might just take as fact, leading to some worrying real-world outcomes.
It's a fascinating area, isn't it? That interplay between the message and how it lands, especially with people maybe looking for simple answers in, let's face it, very complex times. Yeah. And it really throws a spotlight on critical thinking, which is so vital with the sheer amount of information bombarding us daily. That's a key theme.
Okay, so let's start with the YouTube speaker's main concern. It seems to be about that common defense you hear for figures like Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson. People's like, oh, they're just asking questions, or it's just their opinion.
Right. And the source makes it really clear the issue isn't free speech itself. It's not about asking questions per se. The problem, as the source puts it, is with individuals out there who are not the brightest bulbs in the light store, who then take these opinions or questions and absorb them as fact. They build a whole worldview around it. And the source warns some of those people are going to be insane enough to go and act on, which raises serious questions about responsibility. Responsibility for the content creators, for the minds that they are deceiving and therefore leading down a very dangerous path.
And to make this concrete, the source highlights a specific example, a young man's video. The YouTube speaker apparently watched just the first 30 seconds and was, shocked because the contradiction is just so stark right from the start. This young man began saying things like, Christ is king and we need to be good civilians, make the world a better place. But then literally within 20 seconds, he completely shifts and says, I reckon we should probably bomb Israel.
It's a jarring leap. The source calls it seeming nonsense and points to these non-factual facts. Ideas presented as truth, but with no basis. And, the core contradiction is a self-proclaimed Christian wanting to blow up the homeland of Christ. It really shows how some individuals, as the source suggests, just can't fathom the contradiction that they live.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting as the source digs into his reasoning. Why bomb Israel? He believes Israel and, quote, the Jewish community have so much control over Western society, so much control over the world. He calls them very evil, even Satan, and goes so far as to claim they're not Jewish.
But here's the kicker, and it's something the source really emphasized. Despite these incredibly strong, violent opinions, the young man himself admits he doesn't know much. He literally says, I'm not that educated on Jewish culture, and adds, I am a Christian, but I don't know much about Christianity. He also admits he has no idea when Israel was reestablished.
Which was 1948, the source points out.
Right. A pretty fundamental piece of context. So it really makes you wonder, what are these strong opinions actually built on?
So you've got this tangle, accuses Jewish people of being satanic controllers, but then can't define real Jews, doesn't know much about the culture. The source describes it as living in a world of contradictions where everything cancels out the next thing. It just doesn't hold together logically.
And this connects directly to what the source calls echo chambers, where people just continue to reinforce and regurgitate the same information without the contrary or even the questioning of the information presented. That's how these ideas, these parasitic ideas, as the source puts it, manage to survive and spread. It's a closed loop.
Then there's his take on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He claims Israel started 2 wars with Iran and Palestine and has been pushing them so severely. He calls Israel completely diabolical, proper fucking warmongers.
Well, the source pushes back on that narrative quite strongly. It mentions Hamas, described as terrorists, attacking Israel on October 7th, killing 1,200 people, taking hostages. And the source sort of asks rhetorically, how else would you deal with a group like Hamas if not through actions like Israel's taking? It highlights a real gap in his understanding of the conflict trigger.
He also talks about wanting regime change in Israel and seems to think bombing is the way to achieve it.
Yeah, and that's another point the source corrects. Israel is a democracy. Regime change happens through elections. They apparently had, 5 regime changes in 4 years. It happens via the ballot box. The source even draws a parallel, saying it's a bit like Democrats or liberals talking about Trump, applying similar heated rhetoric without maybe fully grasping the different political.
So where is he getting all this from? He's actually quite open about it. He says, I love Candace Owens and Mayan Game. Views them as the 2 true speakers.
Even though the YouTube speaker flatly states, they're lying to you. And this leads to the source's observation about who gets drawn into this. People who might be deeply misinformed, maybe hold some resentment or have a need for a scapegoat. Or maybe they're lonely, perhaps intoxicated, and they fall down these internet rabbit holes. It really traces a line from specific influencers to these concerning views.
There's also a point about hypocrisy that the source raises. These individuals might say they distrust mainstream media, CNN, MSNBC, Axios, but then they seem to believe the very same sources, without question, when the story has to do with Jews.
Which leads the YouTube speaker to conclude, look, this tells me it only has everything to do with Jew hatred and there's really nothing else there. That's the source's interpretation of that.
Okay, so stepping back, what does this mean more? The force challenges this conspiratorial thinking pattern. Like, why aren't there similar conspiracy theories about, say, Indian Americans being the highest earners in the U.S., or Chinese Americans being higher, or the example given, Germans having disproportionate control of the beer industry? Why only focus on one group for these kinds of theories?
Exact. The source suggests much more mundane, logical explanation. Success in certain fields often comes down to choices, people deciding to enter industries, building businesses over families deciding to gear their kids towards law, they gear their kids towards medicine, they geared their kids towards politics. It's about focus and effort. The source uses analogies. Russians often dominate chess. Kenyans often dominate marathons. Is it something in their blood? Or is it about cultural support, prioritization, training infrastructure? It's likely the latter, not some grand conspiracy.
And that leads to a really powerful takeaway from the source. What you prioritize, you get. Simple as that almost. It promotes a more nuanced, evidence-based view instead of just, trust me, bro, this secret knowledge kind of thing.
And it connects to intellectual honesty. The source mentions the scientific mindset. As a true scientist, you can't live where you have to confirm your bias. You must also be open to being wrong. That willingness to question your own belief is...
The source also tackles the idea that you can't criticize Israel. It argues you absolutely can criticize the Israeli government, not just in America, but also in Israel. People protest there in the streets, and seemingly without any sort of real retribution, any sort of real consequences, at least not the kind you'd see elsewhere.
Right. And the source contrasts that sharply with trying the same thing, protesting the government in places like Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, or under Hamas in Palestine. The likely outcome there, being dragged through the streets, bleeding out. It really questions where speech is truly suppressed versus where criticism is actually permitted, even if it's loud.
There's also a mention about harassing Jewish students on campuses, where the source claims very little will happen until supposedly DJT stepped. The YouTube speaker presents this as another falsehood, the young man, reinforcing this idea from the source that, unfortunately, Jew bashing can sometimes seem like a viable path for attention or even a career.
Which all culminates in the YouTube speaker's final very strong. They say, one thing you can't call me is a damn fool, and I'm not about to be fooled by any of these people, and I'm not about to let anybody else be fooled as long as I can help it. It's a real declaration of wanting to push back against misinformation personally and for others.
So wrapping this up, this deep dive really illuminated how these unchallenged, often contradictory ideas, sometimes fueled by these online echo chambers,
right,
and often lacking any real factual grounding, can genuinely lead people down some pretty dark paths. All while claiming they're just, asking questions.
Yeah, and I think connecting it to the bigger picture, it just highlights, again, that critical need for intellectual honesty and responsibility. Responsibility from those creating the content, yes, but also from us, the consumers. It's about really trying to discern information carefully, question our own assumptions, look at the broader context, especially when faced with these simplistic, often conspiratorial narratives.
Well said. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this deep dive today. And maybe something to think about as you go. Consider that responsibility not just for those sharing information, but for ourselves as receivers. In this age of constant information flow, how do you actively work to tell truth from, manufactured facts? And what role does that continuous learning, that intellectual humility, play in guarding against dangerous deception?